Shut up and sit down.
Hi guys, this is Big Mech's Workshop and Paint Studio, and I'm Dodge, and today, as promised, we're going to be building some craters. Now again, I'm using 5mm thick foam core, and to start off with I'm going to need something to draw around, because I want a nice shape to give me some parameters to work with. So I'm just using the plaster container to get a good circle going on. Now I end up deciding that I don't want to do just a plain circle, I want to make it a bit more in depth, and that's a good sized circle to fit 5 to 10 guys in. So I'm using part of a postage and packaging tube to do a second circle. Now I've got a rough parameter there. I'm going to draw around the outside of it, and that'll give me a mark to where not to cut into, or cut out of, sorry. Because we want to leave some raised bits, because we're going to dip this in. Now while I was thinking about this, I fiddled around with the painting drawing a little bit more, and decided to do another outline around the outside of that. And that's going to be the bit that touches the board. So that will be the beveled part. Just working this up in sections and figuring out what I want to do with this particular shape. Now just getting my Stanley knife and straight hacking that out of there. These cuts don't need to be too neat because we're going to bevel the edge anyway. So you can just hack those straight off. Just try and keep to the outside of your lines, because if you keep going to the inside of every line, your crate will end up a bit smaller than you expect it to be. You always want to leave yourself more material to work with than you need. Now once I've cut that off, I'm going to start beveling that edge, which is simple enough. You just want to be doing about a 35-degree angle. That's why I've changed knives. This long Stanley knife is much better, because it's able to get in at the angle, whereas the short Stanley blade wouldn't have been able to do this. Working it around, you want to make sure you don't have any sharp edges. You want to keep it as smooth as possible, so all your models can stand on it. Now I'm going to start scoring around the outside. Scoring around the larger crater. Because I wasn't quite sure at this point whether I was going to do the small crater or not. Now all I did was peel off the plastic card for that. The foam core, the cardboard part. And instead of cutting this bit out, I decided I was going to flatten it down, because it's only 5mm thick. If I cut all that out and then start filling it with PVA glue, it's going to bow and it's not going to be as sturdy. So what I ended up doing was basically pushing this down to make the crater, which after 5 or 10 minutes you can actually get it pretty flat. It's not exactly the most tough material. Obviously it doesn't look anything like a crater so far, but we're going to use a bunch of other techniques to get that going. Then what I've been doing here is, because foam core is melted with super glue, starting from the inside and working towards the outside, doing circles of super glue. Now, giving that a minute or two, not even quite that long, about 30 seconds to a minute, to eat its way through the plastic card. This is going to give the crater more shape and more depth. Then what I'm going to do is use a pencil and start pulling from the center to the outside. This is going to start engraving the blast marks, because obviously it's melted, and it's just so much easier to work with that way. As you can see, you're starting to get that blast marker sort of shape now. and when that sets it'll be nice and solid again, so you can paint it and work on it from there. As you can see, that's starting to get some good depth to it. Now I'm using offcuts of foam core. Got it right this time instead of calling it plasticard. Some offcuts of foam core to make concrete parts of road and everything else that's come up. I'm going to start placing those around the edge, but I have cut those also at a 35-degree angle, so they not sticking up too high. You still want your models to be able to stand on these. You just want to use PVA glue for those because you don't want to melt any more of your stuff. And then I'm going to take a lot of plaster, and to make sure those don't fall off or get moved around over time, that one's not fully set. I'm going to start pushing the plaster underneath into all those gaps, so when it bonds they've got something nice and sturdy to rest against. Also, to add a bit more depth to it, I'm going to start putting in large chunks of cat litter as other bits of rubble. Just poking them under there with a pencil, they're going to add even more support. And we're doing this while the plaster's wet, so everything bonds together nice and solid. It's like making a small dry stone wall or something. Doesn't take too long to do these, and then going over those with plaster again. As you can see, I decided not to do the second crater, but to build a bit of road or some concrete structure that's been dented and broken and not quite been hit with all the force. Now this is a cat litter that's gone through a sieve, so that's how me and Andy get our really fine little pebbles. Nice and cheap. Buy one big bag of cat litter, run it through a sieve, you get plenty of this. I'm going to put that around all the edges as well. Then we're going to start working with the mixed sand. Like I said on the other video, that's anything that was ever left on the table. And that's going to get put on there while it's still wet. You want to leave most of the stones out of the middle because they'll all be blown out from the force of the explosion. Now it seems like we're starting to get somewhere with this. It does start to look like an actual explosion, or actual crate. Now I'm going back to the plaster because the foam core itself has no texture on it whatsoever, so we're going to cover it in macrolin or plaster, and we're going to stipple that to give it a concrete texture. Just using a regular paintbrush, then using something with hard bristles afterwards to dab into it, leaving lots of tiny stab marks in it, but once it's dried you'll be able to dry brush over this and bring out all those textures. I went a little bit light with this. I should have done about 2 layers of that. Now all this is cheap poster paint from a pound shop, or you can use any acrylic paint basically. It's only terrain, you don't need to use your Games Workshop decent paints. And this is just a random brown mixed with a bit of black, so I wanted a good dark colour. No, sorry, I think this is just black on its own. And that gave a bit of a base coat. Now this colour was mixed up just using the white, blue, brown and black. It's basically the same colour as Dark Reaper. And we're going to cover the whole thing in this. It's the same base colour we're going to do most of our terrain in at this point, anything concrete. You want to make sure you're getting all the little grooves though, so the whole thing matches. Once that's done, I'm going to start mixing a bit of, quite a lot of brown into that, but still mixing that with the same base colour. And start going into any area that isn't the concrete part. This is going to break them up and give it a bit more depth. This layer doesn't have to be perfectly neat, you can leave patches. Because what we're going to do in a minute is go back to that Dark Reaper mix and start dabbing that in while the 2 colours are wet and mixing it on the actual crater itself. That way you don't have a hard divide between the two colours or hard transition. It's going to look a bit more natural that way. Now we're going to add a little bit more white to that dark Reaper mix and start going over the crater. Just a good old dry brush. And now I've mixed even more white in. We're going for more of a grey at this point for everything else. And just cover the entirety of all those big concrete parts. You don't have to be particularly neat with any of this. Obviously, I'd recommend batch building a bunch of these. This shouldn't take too long. I'm going to let that dry. And the good old Games Workshop dry brush. Adding a bunch more grey, and we're going to start a bunch more white into that grey, sorry, and we're going to start dry brushing just the stones on their own. And this is where I realised I should have gone a bit heavier on the plaster for those, so the texture was a bit easier to pick up. You don't have to use a Games Workshop dry brush, you can just use pound shop brushes, which is what I tend to use most of the time. But because the texture wasn't as deep as I wanted it to be, I decided to go for the dry brush. Now all I've done here is get some Vallejo pigments and start mixing those in. This is burnt umber mixed with sand yellow. Just mixing those in with the dry brush to add a bunch more depth and colour transitions all over. And at this point you can pretty much finish this off now. For battle terrain it'll do the job, not too bad. Well, there's a few things I wish I'd have changed about it. Colour could have been a bit better. But we don't have many pigments in the studio and I've been in a rush to get all these done. So that's about it guys, thanks for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.